Hello, everyone. To those just joining us, welcome. You are at the Advocacy in Action Media Training for HIV and Aging Advocates webinar presented by Sage. We are just going to give folks a couple more minutes to filter in. The participant count is still going up, but excuse me. We're happy to have you with us, and we will get started in just another minute. Alrighty, I think we can get started. There are still some folks trickling in, but we have a lot of great content that we want to share with you all. So let's get to it. My name is Cam Cody. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Civic Engagement Coordinator here at Sage. For those who are unfamiliar, Sage is the oldest and largest organization dedicated to advocating on behalf and serving LGBTQ plus older adults, including those living with HIV and their caregivers. We were founded in 1978 and are headquartered in New York City. As I mentioned before, today's webinar is part of a two-part series, the next one being next week. But today's is focused on advocacy in action, media training for HIV aging advocates. You can join us for part two, which is next Wednesday, May 28th at 2:30 p.m. And that'll focus on storytelling for policy change on HIV and aging. We will make sure to get that link in the chat for you if you have not yet registered. But today, focused on media training. So before we get started and I kick it over to my colleague, Bren, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. You might notice that the chat is indeed disabled. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom bar on your screen. We will get to answering questions throughout the presentation. My colleague Terry Wilder, who is the HIV aging policy advocate, will also be there. She is. Say hi, Terry. She will.
Hey, everybody.
There we go. She'll also be on the line answering questions, and as many of you probably know, she has a pretty extraordinary expertise. Um, I just want to say please avoid sharing personal or sensitive information that you don't want shared publicly. The answers in the Q&A get published so everyone can see them, and this webinar is being recorded. So I just want to give a heads up there. The last piece, captions, excuse me, are available, also located on the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, just press, there's a circle with an ellipses, under which is the word more, and you should be able to turn on the closed captioning function using that button. Without further ado, I will pass it to my colleague, Bren Cole, to get us into the meat of the content.
Thank you so much, Kim and Terry. My name is Bren Cole. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Sage. My bread and butter is media, PR, and helping folks share their stories in service of our community. And so today I'm going to be talking about basically how to talk to the media. Right now we're in a place where grassroots advocacy is especially needed, both on the HIV front, the aging front, and the HIV and aging front. There's a lot of policy at the federal and state levels that are putting the community in a risky place. And so right now, having more folks share their experiences, their expertise, and their voices with the press is really important, but that's not always easy for a lot of folks. It can be very intimidating. And so my goal today is to kind of empower everyone to feel like they can talk to the press, and like really know how to share their story, share their voice and the message they're trying to get across, and own that narrative. And as a former journalist, I also know how reporters think, so I can kind of give you an idea of, how to make sure that you are prepared, ready, and feeling, like I said, empowered to share your story. So I'm going to start the PowerPoint now. All right. So as Kim said, this presentation is part one of our two-part series, Advocacy and Action Media Training for HIV and Aging Advocates. So if that's what you signed up for, you're in the right place. Congratulations. So I'm going to start by talking about why HIV and aging is becoming more of an important topic in the media. The quick answer is the number of people with HIV who are over 55 is also increasing. So a lot of the first generation of folks who really lived with the epidemic, um, who are long-term survivors, are now entering their senior years. So for the first time, conversations are happening more and more around how to advocate for folks who are at the intersection of both HIV and aging and what their needs might be and how that differs from the general aging population. So today's webinar is going to focus on the three parts of interviews, basically getting ready, the prep beforehand, during the interview, how to tell your story and own the narrative, and afterwards, um, how to share the news and some examples of successful media placements that Sage has helped put in the news around HIV and aging. So the first part is how to get ready for your interview. Number one thing to do in any interview situation is to make sure you're carving time ahead of time that's going to give you plenty of time for preparation before the interview happens. You never want to feel rushed. You never want to feel that you're not at your best place to you want to tell your story in a way that feels relaxed and not rushed. So the biggest thing is confidence and preparation. So you want to make sure you feel ready to say what you need to say on that day. I always say one of the most important things to do beforehand is to write down your key points, get a little cheat sheet together. What's the main message you're trying to convey? What are the parts of that message? What are the details you want to make sure are in there? The date, the dates, the names, the places, the who, what, where. What sort of stuff do you want to make sure you don't forget? And make sure you don't have to remember, details around, say you want to share like an HIV and aging statistic or um, a certain name of a study that you're trying to reference. You don't want to focus on remembering that stuff day of. You want to focus on being able to tell the narrative that you're there to tell. So just writing that stuff down ahead of time takes the burden off of you to memorize the numbers and the names and focus on the point of the conversation. So whenever you want to make a key point around, why HIV and aging is an important topic in the media and why you're there talking about it, you always want to bring the conversation back to real people. I mentioned things like stats and studies before, which are obviously very important. The numbers are important, but when it comes to the media, what really, does the quintessential changing of hearts and minds are the stories about how the issue affects real people. So, for example, if you're talking about why housing for people with HIV who are aging is so important in this situation, the HOPWA side of things, you might want to describe your personal experiences with accessing housing as a person who is aging with HIV, or talk about someone that you know maybe you're a caregiver or an advocate for someone that you know who's aging with HIV who has been struggling to find a safe and affordable place to live. That is the point of the story. That is what the reporter is going to really hold on to, and that's what's going to be important to readers to understand the effects of real people on real people when it comes to this issue. And then make sure you're always comfortable ahead of time with the format and location of the interview. If the interview is going to be in person, on camera or not, make sure it's in a location that's accessible for you. Map out your travel route and the time to get there ahead of time. So, day of, you know exactly what you're looking for as far as when you should leave, when you should arrive. I always say arrive at least 15 minutes early just to get settled, get your notes together, and feel that you have time to mentally prepare as well ahead of time. These days, most interviews are probably going to be either over the phone or over Zoom or another platform. So, um, for phone interviews, I always say just make sure you find a quiet, private place with good, signal strength. You'd be surprised by how often folks don't think about that until the last minute. And then for Zoom and online interviews, plan to sign on early, especially if it's a platform you haven't used before. Let's say you know how to use Zoom, obviously, because you're here. But what if they want to meet on Google Meet or Teams or something else? Give yourself a chance to get familiar with the platform ahead of time, and then make sure you have a good internet connection, obviously. And when it comes to technology, don't be afraid to ask the reporter to meet you where you are. Maybe you don't feel comfortable, being interviewed via a platform like Zoom. Maybe you would rather do a phone interview. Maybe you don't want to be on camera. In my experience, most journalists are really looking for the story, and they'll be accommodating when it comes to kind of meeting you where you are as far as your comfort with technology. So this is what to do when you're actually in the room with the reporter or in the virtual room with the reporter. Like I mentioned, bring your cheat sheet ahead of time. It's sort of your safety net during an interview. It's this still happens to me to this day. If you're being interviewed, sometimes you feel like you are you know all your facts and what you want to say ahead of time, and then once you're actually doing it, you get nervous, you blank, you forget things. Your cheat sheet is really sort of your North Star to make sure that you're hitting the points that you want to make, and to make sure that you're keeping the conversation on topic. So speaking of being on topic, um, often reporters, whether they mean to or not, they come to you with a story in mind, or at least an idea of a story that they want to share. So sometimes questions might be leading you in a certain direction because that's what they want to talk about, but it might not be what you're there to talk about or what you think is the important part of your story. So what's really helpful, I find, are things called bridging statements, which are basically things you can drop in a conversation to kind of get things back on topic, back on track, and make sure that the focus is really what you're there to talk about and not something that's totally, off base. So here are some great examples of bridging statements. What's most important to know is bring it back to the fact, the story, the point. Let me just add to this that. I think it'd be more correct to say if you feel the journalist is maybe not reporting something exactly correctly or taking things out of context. Let me emphasize again, a great way to drive your point home. Another thing to remember is that reminds me, kind of a more conversational way of being like, by the way, that reminds me of this thing that happened to someone that I know that's really relevant here. And then, of course, here's the real issue, which is basically, this is why I'm here today. This is what I want you to share with your readers and your readers to take away from this conversation. If you stumble or misspeak during an interview, even if it's on camera or off, it's okay. You're human. It happens to everyone. Pause, take a breath. If you feel that you really just didn't get your point across correctly because you were nervous or misspoke, just ask the reporter if you can try phrasing your thoughts again. And then always, if you're not sure that you understand the question that's being asked of you, repeat it back to the reporter for clarification or ask them to phrase it a different way. Most important thing really is just to be confident. you're there. You might feel intimidated because the press can feel intimidating, but you're the subject expert. You are the the owner of your narrative. You know what you're talking about. That's why the journalist wants to talk to you. They are interested in what you know, what you have to share, and they want to do their best to share it with the world correctly. So remember that, like, you're the person who knows what you're talking about, and they're interested in hearing you. So take confidence in that. Um, so if you work directly with Sage on a media placement, and I'll show you some examples of media placements later on. Um, Sage has an outside PR firm we also work with. We are really very cognizant about vetting journalists and outlets before asking anyone to be part of an interview. Um, ahead of time, we will provide you with things like a background check on the reporter and the outlet, get an idea of what their previous work was like, really just get an idea if there's biases there, either with the reporter themselves or with the outlet. Um, and that prep sheet that will include information about SAGE and or statistics for HIV and aging that you might find helpful to have to back up what you're saying. That said, even all the vetting in the world can't account for human behavior. So there's a possibility that the journalist might ask you a question that you're not comfortable answering for whatever reason. You never have to answer a question for the media that makes you uncomfortable, that you feel is invasive or rude or inappropriate. You're not in court. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say, and if the way they're asking it doesn't feel appropriate, maybe they're using language that's outdated. You know, you can use the opportunity to educate them if you feel like it. You can let them know, hey, that terminology isn't really how the community talks about these things. Here's what you should be saying. And that way you also can make sure that the story itself, is accessible and affirming to the community that it's talking about. So like I said, you can always just say, I don't feel comfortable answering that. And if the reporter is a good reporter, they will respect that response and move on. If they continue to push, you stay firm, do not feel pressured, and then feel free to end the interview. These days, unfortunately, there's a lot of sort of bad actors out there who don't always have the best intentions in mind when it comes to interviewing folks around things like HIV or LGBTQ issues in general. Obviously, a lot of kind of gotcha journalism is uh, trending these days. So um, you might find yourself in that situation. And if so, I encourage you to end the interview and just say, that you don't feel comfortable, you're done here. And then if you are working with us in that situation, please let us know so we can make sure to make a note of the incident and no longer work with that reporter or that outlet because it's really important to make sure that folks are sharing their stories with outlets and reporters who have good intentions, who have their best interests in mind, and want to really share the stories of our community in a fair and respectful way. So this is for after the interview. Um, if the reporter happens to ask for any post-interview materials, let's say they want some photos, maybe some links, citations for studies, things like that that you might not have, and you're working with us, you can definitely direct them right to me, and I can provide that information. No need for you to go digging, unless you really want to for this kind of stuff yourself. We can definitely provide that. And then once again, when the story is live, we will send you a URL to share across your social media if you're comfortable with that. We'll share across our social media and make sure that we're spreading the word across our networks. And then finally, these are just a few examples of media placements that we've worked with HIV and aging advocates in the past year or so to place in some pretty great outlets. Route 50 here work with us on a piece around how to prevent older adults from HIV-related discrimination in healthcare. Obviously, a super important topic that's going to become even more relevant as healthcare issues really take the forefront. On the federal level, Forbes worked with one of a great advocate named Ronald, who I believe you'll be meeting next week, um, around his journey aging with HIV and how we leverage HIV and Aging Awareness Day as a time to really bring more national attention towards the issues around folks who are long-term survivors or aging with HIV. And this is a great example of how someone's personal story became the focus of an interview with a much wider message. And then finally, we had a piece in the Advocate around HIV and Aging Awareness Day with a focus on LGBTQ elders who are living with HIV and the intersection of um, sort of minority stress and certain barriers to care that they might be facing. And finally, I really encourage everyone to get involved with our action squad at Sage. Our action squad is our advocacy grassroots movement. We are really doing this in the sort of in the spirit of Stonewall, including inviting folks in the community to get involved and to join our mailing list so they're up to date with the latest changes in policy and legislation, and also opportunities to take direct action through things like public comment periods, surveys, um, uh, uh, sessions at state or federal houses, things like that. And this is just a list of the type of policies that SAGE advocates for, all the way from discrimination in long-term care. Obviously, a lot of work on HIV cultural competency for providers, both on the healthcare side and the aging side. Inclusive data collection, advocating for HIV care and prevention. As you know, HIV prevention on the federal levels in a sort of delicate place right now with changes at the CDC. Work with the Older Americans Act. Something else is also um, facing some changes as well around the ACL. Um, Domestic partnerships, legal definitions of families, and then working on the side of veterans to get benefits back for other than honorable discharges. And down the bottom here is just a few examples of ways you can take direct action um, around HIV aging issues and really any issues that face the community. Send a letter to representatives, or call in to share why a certain legislative piece matters to you. Join a training, much like this one, to learn how to leverage the power of your personal story for positive impact, and attend an event or webinar to become more informed. Next week's webinar will be such a webinar as well, so I really encourage you all to join that. And for a quick and easy way to join our email list for updates on action alert items, there's a QR code in the corner here. We can also put the link in the chat as well to sign up. And we hope to see you on the Action Squad side of things. So if there's any questions you don't feel like sharing today or comments or anything, feel free to reach me directly. My email is bcole@sageusa.org. And like once again, this will be recorded, so you can also reference this later on if you'd like.
Thanks, Bren. So we have one question in the chat about if the slides are going to be shared afterwards. Cam says that they're able to send them out, but we just need your permission.
You have my permission.
Okay. All right. Good to know. So, for the person who asked that question, we'll be able to share the slides. The other thing that's important to know is that we are recording this training. And so, most of our trainings that we record can be found on the National Resource Center webpage, which I'm wondering if Cam could dig that up and drop that in the chat, just in case you're unfamiliar with our National Resource Center on LGBT aging. This is where we have lots of materials, like one-pagers, toolkits, but we also put a lot of our recorded trainings there. So I encourage you to check it out. If folks have other questions, I encourage you to go to the Q&A and put your question in there and I can read it for you. But in the interim, Bren, I have some questions for you.
Absolutely.
Um, I'm just wondering about what the culture is around asking if the reporter can send you questions in advance,
Hmm.
just so that you can have a little bit more time to prepare. And if that's something that you've seen done, or, what is the culture around that?
Definitely. Honestly, it depends. It's different per outlet. Some outlets have, very strict rules about not doing that, and some are totally okay with it. So I would say ask if that would be helpful. We can put an ask in for you if you're working directly with us. But it really kind of depends on the rules of the actual outlet itself.
Yeah, I know that you've worked with me before about getting interviewed, and sometimes Um, I've found that it's helpful if we can try to get the questions in advance. Like sometimes they're like, I'm not going to have time to put it up. I kind of go very organic and I try to be more conversational. But I don't think it hurts to ask.
Not at all. And often, if you can't get the exact questions, you get an idea of sort of like the things that they're looking for. So you can tailor, your prep sheet ahead of time to make sure that you're hitting around those kind of points or that kind of theme and you can kind of guess what the questions will be like based on that.
Yeah, exactly. As you were speaking, Brent, I was thinking about the very famous ACT UP activist Ann Northrup, that really she helped ACT UP New York really come up with their media strategy, and all the things that they were able to achieve with stories being in the press, whether it's TV or print. And this, of course, was before social media. And one of the things that everybody quotes from Ann Northrup is it really speaks to kind of what you were talking about when people might feel intimidated or a little nervous about speaking to somebody in the press. And she always said, you're speaking through the press to the people that you want to reach. And she's like, they're just a vehicle for that happening.
Absolutely.
And, really thinking about like, who am I really trying to tell this to? Like, it's not the reporter necessarily, it's the people, the audience, that watch TV5 News or that read the New York Times. Like, those are the people that you're really trying to get your story and your message to.
Absolutely. That's such a good point, Terry, too, because that can also be a way of framing the way you want to speak about your story. If you think about who would be the ideal person that you would like to either read this article or see this broadcast, what would you hope that person would get for this, and what would you hope they would do with it? And that can kind of help you figure out almost a call to action to put into your narrative.
Yeah. So I'm seeing some questions come through. One person shares that they don't have any concerns about sharing their personal story. They don't have fear about engaging in the conversation, but they're not sure how to get a reporter to actually ask the questions, I guess, that they want to have asked.
Mhm. I think that's a great question, and I think that's actually another place we can utilize those bridging statements I mentioned. Um, you can say things like one point that's really essential here, or I want to make something that this reminds me of, or I really found this to be a very important thing to think of. You can sort of drop those into the conversation and sort of almost encourage them to ask a question based on that. Um, and then, that might actually lead to further questions that go down the line of the topic you're interested in.
We also have another question from someone that gives a real practical situation that it sounds like they're grappling with. It says, "How would you address when a radio host invites you on air but says, quote, send me what you want to talk about so we can craft the script?"
Hmm. I guess I would ask you to think about how comfortable you are with the idea of a script versus a conversation. It might be for them part of their policy to have sort of something pre-written ahead of time, maybe to share with their producer or something like that. Um, but I would say this is when you want to rely on things like your cheat sheet ahead of time. Um, I would send them the sort of notes, the bullet points ahead of time, but I wouldn't send a full script because uh, you don't want to feel like you're doing a PSA. You want to feel like you're having a conversation during this, because otherwise it's not going to come across as natural or come across as a human story. So I would supply them with the basics and say that you want to elaborate on that once you're actually on air.
Great, thank you. So another person says, um, oh, it's my friend Jeff Barry. Um, it says, thanks for a great presentation, Bren. This is assuming that the interview is already in place. Can you talk a little bit about pitching a story to media outlet? And Jeff and I are twins because I literally put on my question, ask Bren about pitching.
Mhm. Well, I would say I encourage you to work directly with Sage because we do have an active press list that's based on outlets and areas of interest for certain journalists. So we have an entire press list of folks who really focus on HIV and aging, for example. Um, so that's a great way of doing that. Another way of doing that, a great way to get your foot in the door. If there's a publication, for example, you want to hopefully be featured in, start by a letter to the editor. Um, if there's, let's say there's a recent article around HIV and aging that you have some thoughts on that you feel you could add something to, or you could sort of like challenge misconceptions or things you don't feel are accurate in it, write a letter to the editor of that publication and see if you get published. And that often can trigger a journalist to want to reach out and find out more about you and hear more from you because you're always positioning yourself sort of as a subject expert. And honestly, journalists, and I can say this as a former journalist, are lazy most of the time. So if they see somebody in the layers of the editor section who seems like they know what they're talking about, odds are good that they're going to reach out to them for their next article around that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to pitch before, just like in my personal life for, something that I volunteer for. And, you know, it feels hard at first if you don't like have a relationship that's already established. But I find that, if you just kind of keep trying to approach the reporter, at your local paper. So I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So like my local paper is the Star Tribune, one TV station is KSTP. And sometimes you can go on the website and the reporters will have their email that says, send pitches or ideas for a story to me at this email. So sometimes they're actively looking for stories, particularly around like awareness days. And in the HIV community, we have tons of awareness days throughout the year. And so for something like Long-Term Survivors Day, which is June 5th, that might be a good time to pitch a story and say, hey, I don't know if you know, but we have this awareness day coming up that, can focus on people aging with HIV, older people with HIV. And then, of course, we have National HIV and Aging Awareness Day, which is September 18th, which is a great hook.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's awareness days, especially if you're pitching, say, like to someone like the Advocate who's already thinking about these sort of things as a yearly feature for them, or another, or something like, Plus Magazine, Pause Magazine, things like that. But also, we made a really good point there, Terry. Sometimes starting small with your local town, county paper, whatever, who, obviously has fewer resources, fewer reporters, they're a lot more likely to take a pitch that's emailed to them because they're looking for stories. They don't have as many resources. And then if you get published in a smaller paper, a larger paper might find you when they're looking for someone to interview around the topic. So it can sort of be your intro into the world of being a spokesperson They see you one place, then the next thing you get a call from a much larger publication who's interested, and from there on out, you become a voice for the community.
Yeah, exactly. And, much like the relationships that we try to have with elected officials, it's kind of the same thing. I know I'm dating myself in saying this, but like you want them to put your contact information in their Rolodex, like so that they're like, when they think about HIV and aging, they're like, I know who to call.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
we have a question related to writing letters to the editor. And the question is, would you ever recommend that someone use a pseudonym for letters to the editor?
I guess it depends on what you want to happen after that letter is published. If you want to be contacted anyway, then I would say no. I would encourage you to put your information in there. But if this is a personal story that you just want to share, or maybe someone else's story, but you would rather be anonymous about it, there's nothing wrong with that at all. They're not going to do a background check on whether your name exists or not. But it really kind of depends on what you would like to happen after that. If that's the one-time thing where you just want to make sure a narrative is heard, but you don't want it to be tied to you or someone else I say go for it. But if you want to continue on and have future opportunities to work with the press, I would discourage it because you're, basically taking almost like a byline away from yourself in that way. So I really would just it'd be based on what you would like to happen after that as far as your relationship with talking to the press.
Yeah, recently I've been trying to pitch letters to the editor, particularly around the Medicaid cuts and how those will affect people aging with HIV. And it's been interesting. One thing to do is to go to the website of the newspaper that you want to write your letter to editor to, and it'll tell you like you have to email it to this email. It has to be like you're more likely to get published if it's 150 words or less, which is hard to do. Um, and the other thing it'll say is like you have to put your name, address, city, and phone number. And they'll say, we're not going to publish your address and phone number, but we need to know you're a real person.
Mm,
So sometimes they'll put some parameters around how anonymous or not you can be. So that's something that like is important to go to the website to see what their policy is. Another question, which is an interesting question, which kind of brings up how SAGE often creates things collectively, not only across staff, but sometimes with other organizations. So somebody asked, how do y'all approach collectively creating shared messaging? And this person is looking for insights on collaboratively drafting a policy agenda and messages because they're a new coalition coordinator. And so Bren and maybe even Cam wants to jump in on this. Like there's been times where we've collectively pushed out messaging, maybe not necessarily to the press, but to the community.
mhm. I think the first thing to do really is make a mailing list. Who is the person at these organizations that's going to be directly involved with the messaging? Is there a comms person? Is there a marketing person? If it's a small organization, like who's a decision maker around wording, language choices, things like that. Create a mailing list like that and start having these conversations on email. I do a lot of times, honestly. I will do live, drafting sessions where folks will hop on a call, have a shared document, and draft language together in sort of a really collaborative way like that. Other times, folks just don't have the time or the schedules don't match up, and we draft something via an email chain. But the important thing is making sure that the person from each organization that you're working with is the one who is able to make these language decisions because wording choices, framing choices can really depend on the organization and their policies. So, like if you were to draft something that's supposed to be one size fits all, it might not work for those organizations. Maybe they have certain uh, certain guidelines they have to follow, whether they're a 501c3 or a different kind of organization. So make sure the decision makers around that are involved in that conversation off the bat. Otherwise, you'll find yourself going back to the drawing board more times than you want to. And think about the timeline. What if you draft something, what is the goal around that? Is it something timely? Is it something in response to legislation that's pending, something that just happened? Is there a public comment period coming up that you want to have this out beforehand? Make sure you establish that really firm deadline ahead of time and make sure that you're sticking to that timeline to have like a really impactful statement as well. I'm going to pass over to Cam too because Cam knows a lot more about policy than I do. So there's a few things I'm missing there as well.
Yeah, and forgive me, I'm experiencing some trouble with my uh the visual, so I don't know if you all can see me, but bummer. Sorry about that. Zoom is being very finicky. Um, but yeah, in terms of crafting a policy agenda, I would think of that as sort of a separate endeavor than the messaging piece of it. And my best advice in terms of pursuing that effort would be to talk to the folks implicated by the policies that you're looking to create or form. And I can actually use some of the work we're doing here at Sage as an example. Um, we're currently, I mean, we're always adjusting and redeveloping our policy agenda, but we're really looking to do so in a more robust way over the next few months. And a portion of that is going to involve a series of focus groups that we'll be holding with LGBTQ plus older adults themselves, older people living with HIV. And the goal of this is to create a systematic way that we can collect data and hear the most prominent challenges that our constituency is facing on the ground, right? So if you're looking to make a policy agenda that impacts or is aiming to serve a group or a demographic of folks, it's always best just to center the voices and stories of those folks in the crafting of that agenda. And again, apologies that my camera is being finicky.
Cam brings up a good point about how to use kind of data, if you will, for stories. Sage, with a number of other organizations, had some HIV and aging listening sessions at AIDS Watch, but also at the United States Conference on HIV and AIDS. And listening to those stories has helped me when I've spoken to the press to really share you know, stories while anonymous with the press about, these are folks that shared their stories that came from all parts of our country and answer these questions about living and aging with HIV. And here's some of the things that we learned that really are important to think about around why we need the Ryan White program or why we need Medicaid to not be cut. So you can tie a story that you heard or your own story to like a policy issue. Right now in our country, the hot topic for the week in policy is making sure Medicaid doesn't get cut. So hearing stories from folks who are living with HIV, older people living with HIV, who are on Medicaid and what that could do in terms of blocking their access to health care, to see their medical providers, to get home and community-based services. Reporters are looking for those stories right now. And this is a great way to, really share the lived experience and also connect it to a really important policy issue that is currently happening this second. These stories are just really important to think about. People, this is one thing that I was taught. You can give people stats. They're probably going to forget the statistics or the data, but they'll never forget the story that you told because they like as you're telling your story, they see you and they remember your face and how you shared it. If you had some feelings or emotions that came up, they'll never forget that story. And even if you are a person who works in social services and you're telling the story of, a client that you work with, they can almost see the person in their head and then they don't forget that story. Oh, somebody asked a really good question, Bren, about really confidentiality and gathering stories, which I know that you and your team work on a lot. So they asked, do you have a process for gathering, managing, or getting permission to share those stories? Is it a survey or is it a more organic process? And I guess I'm thinking about Julia and the
Yeah.
people that she interviews.
It's a pretty organic process for us because we really work one-on-one with our storytellers. And it honestly, like, we have a whole policy document that we use and have folks sign, sort of like almost like a release form in a way that gives us permission to share their stories. And it also gives them the agency to decide sort of like to what extent we're sharing. So let's say they might be comfortable sharing a quote, but they don't want to be on camera. They don't want to have photographs taken. They might want to just use their first name, not their last name, or they might want to be totally anonymous. Having that conversation before you determine if someone's going to be sharing their story in any capacity is really important. And also making sure you understand that someone's um, preferences might change over time. So it really is an organic conversation because, for example, I mean, I know folks who before the current administration had no problem being out there, very, very vocal and visible, photos, full name as a trans person telling their story, and that's changed a lot in the past just 6 months because of safety issues. So being cognizant of sort of like the political climate and people's lived experiences and identities and how that might those two things affect each other are really important. So there's no like set it and forget it kind of thing here because people are going to change their comfort levels over time. So keeping that conversation organic is really important, but also having some sort of policy document you can share with them and kind of show them the options that they have for how anonymous or not anonymous they want to be in any situation. So they understand the guidelines and it gives them a chance to think about their comfort levels.
Yeah. You know, as we're having this conversation, one thing that might be helpful for folks to kind of entertain is the next time that you watch the news, like today at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock, watch when the reporter interviews someone from the community and watch how that interview goes and think about, wow, that was a great interview. What was it? What did it make? Why did you think it was a great interview? What did the person do? How did they answer the questions? How did they maybe bridge to go back to what they obviously wanted to talk about? Um, think about like what makes you think is a good interview. And you can emulate that. And then also, I think we've all seen bad interviews where clearly the person, was struggling to get the message across, or the reporter kept getting them off track. Think about what things didn't go well. And that can be kind of in your brain as a toolkit. I guess, just practicing. Would you say, Bryn, is a good um thing to do? I think our first interview is always our scariest because we've never
Yes.
done it before.
Practice like literally does make perfect. We have folks who have been doing media interviews, storytelling, first stage on behalf of the LGBTQ elder community for a long time, and some of them have become almost, I would say, professionals at this point about telling their stories because they've done it so many times. And every time that they do it, they understand more and more what's important to them to emphasize, and they understand what gets a reaction from people, what people really sort of hold on to as a takeaway. So um, the first, like Terry said, the first one's always rough. But the more you say it, and the more you feel comfortable with the way you want to say it, um, eventually becomes almost like second nature.
Yeah. And, the other thing that I think is important to remember is, the majority of reporters like want to talk to you. Like they don't have the information to make whatever writing their piece come together or to really tell the message through the TV station that they work for. So they need you as the expert to give them that information. So they're wanting, to ask you these questions and to get a better, deeper understanding of the topic. Now, having said that, there's also reporters that I refer to as like gotcha reporter.
Mhm.
So, Brent, I don't know if you want to talk about like how do you figure out reporters to trust and who may not have your best interest at heart?
Yeah. Google is your best friend. Before you agree to any interview, whether it's something you are doing on your own or something you're doing with Sage, research everything about this reporter. Google them. Look at their previous work, whether it's broadcast or print, and look for signs of bias. Look at the language that they're using. Look at how they're talking about certain things. Um, does it make you comfortable? Does it feel off? Do they feel like they have an agenda to you? Look at the outlet itself. Does the outlet itself have an agenda? What kind of comments are you seeing on these articles? What kind of comments are being allowed in these articles? Look at their social media and the way they talk about their stories and share them on social media. What is the language there? What are they pointing out? Um, I mean, the thing about gotcha journalists is they're not nearly as smart as they think they are. And if a little bit of research, you can get a pretty quick idea of what their agenda is. So, always do that before you agree to talk to anybody. And you're always, like I said, even if you are already having an interview or agree to an interview or whatever, you don't owe them anything. You're doing them a favor, really, because you're giving them information that they need. So you can always cancel an interview and pull out, abandon ship if things are feeling very off during the interview. Uh, you know, trust your instincts around that. And a lot of you have been doing this work for a long time, or are part of the community, and the kind of miscommunication that's out there, and the language people use when they want to purposely miscommunicate the situation. So Google, and do your Sherlock Holmesing ahead of time.
So we have another question. A person says, in Oregon, I'm holding an HIV and LGBTQ plus health policy convening with 30 plus organizations, including Oregon Health Authority. We didn't consider media, but listening here, not sure how to determine or evaluate media's involvement.
Hmm. I would say first off, if you have a press release around this or some sort of something that's easily shareable about the or the convening itself, um, start sending those to local outlets. I would probably stay local for something like this. So if you have news stations or smaller newspapers, send that press release or whatever you have to them and invite them to come. This kind of stuff can be great for you know, uh, local broadcast news, things like that. And then determine ahead of time with the folks you're organizing with the level of media you're comfortable with at the meeting. So, are you okay with journalists asking questions? Are you okay with video photography? Are there certain areas you don't want filming to happen in? What's off limits? What's go? Figure out, what the constraints are and then make sure that the any journalists who are coming, any outlets, any cameras or crew understand those constraints. And then honestly, it can be a really great way to grow a coalition, to grow a movement, by having at least one or two reporters there to at least be documenting it for you.
Yeah, and amplifying your policy
Mm.
priorities. But like Brent said, like it's not an easy answer. Should we have media there or not? Because you really have to look at the risk and the benefits to having it there. in particular around people's confidentiality.
Mhm.
Is this information that you're not ready to share? It could be printed, it could be, something that could get into the hands of people that might, not agree with your policy
Mhm.
priorities. And so it really is something to really take a serious look at together, to make sure it's the right fit for your organization.
Definitely. And one more thing too, if you do decide to have media there who's doing video or photography, you want to have that sort of communicated very clearly to people in the room at the time. So folks have the opportunity to say, I don't want to be on camera, I don't want to be on, and they can be seated accordingly. And then you can tell the journalists, you can record this part of the room, but like don't film these people. Just make sure that consent is also part of the conversation for the attendees.
Yeah, I've even seen people put like, if people have a yellow dot on their name badge, you can record them. But if they have a green dot, you can't,
Mhm.
those kind of things. Well, I realize that we're just at time, and I noticed that one of my colleagues and friends put a question in the Q&A about that they had um, reached out to their elected official to spread the word about no to Medicaid cuts, but wanted to know if there was something else that they could do. And this is a great way to do a letter to the editor and tell your story. Lots of publications are currently writing articles about some of the issues that we care about. And so it's real easy to go like, dear editor, in reference to the article, Medicaid cuts will harm community. I wanted to bring up how Medicaid can affect, people aging with HIV. And then you can tell that story. So that's a great way to advocate and raise awareness about the issues that you care about. So I'm going to kick it back over to Cam.
Yeah, and I think that's a great, not to, I don't think we anticipated giving folks homework, but given the intensity around the need for Medicaid advocacy right now, I think that's something we can all do and use these skills. And again, I think my camera is just not cooperating, so apologies. Um, but I think that's something we can all do tonight is write a letter to the editor using the great skills that Bren has shared and the expertise that Terry has shared to try to stop any Medicaid cuts. But that being said, that's actually a perfect segue into what our part two of this webinar series is going to be, which is next week, which is storytelling for policy change. So if you have not yet registered for part two, I'm going to drop the link in the chat now, and we hope to see you there. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and a special thank you to Bren and Terry for sharing their wisdom and expertise. And I'm dropping that registration in the chat now, and I'll keep the room open a little just so folks can access that link. But otherwise, you'll receive a follow-up email with the slide deck, the registration link for next week, and any other resources that were shared. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
everybody.